Welcome to the Influence Industry interview series brought to you by Tactical Tech. We interview experts to understand the technologies, the companies, and the personalities behind political campaigns across the world. If you want to find out more, check out influenceindustry.org.
I thought it would be nice to just hear a little bit from your point of view on some background, some historical context. What are the relevant political issues today? Can you help set the scene a little bit?
Okay, I will try to do my best. So usually, like when we start, we say that like there is a tiny country below Russia and next to Turkey. It is surrounded by other South Caucasian countries like Armenia and Azerbaijan, and of course, like Turkey and Russia are the neighbors. We had that experience of being part of the Soviet Union for 70 years, but in early 1990s we regained our independence, and since then the very road of political hardships started in Georgia. We unfortunately had few civil wars and unrest in the early 90s, and the country was deeply in corruption, lots of poverty, economic crisis, and so on. I think this is like very important to understand the psychology of the people. A revolution happened in Georgia in 2003, and many things changed, and in a very very short amount of time. And for young people like myself, it was very inspirational because I saw how things not working started like working, and it was like very inspirational for me. And for like some other generations it was more like harder because they had to adjust to like lots of new changes. So what happened was that the country announced zero tolerance towards corruption, and on a lower level the corruption was fully eliminated, I can say very directly and confidently, because what I had seen with this few years difference after the revolution, like this kind of attitude was totally changed. The reports have identified that there were some signs of high-level corruption, meaning that it would not be something that like every other citizen would be able to observe in their everyday lives, but most likely there were still like some corruptions on like very very high level. But for like ordinary Georgians, things changed. What was important for young people was that if prior to the revolution we like in my family as well, like we would be collecting some money to bribe the university professors for me to enter the university, because this was the norm no matter how bright a student you were. After the revolution it became like very unified, and we believed that no one could bribe anyone to enter the university, and it was like totally merit based. So this was like a huge psychological change in our minds. It was a huge like national victory for us to change this course of corruption and poverty and so on, and like go back on our roots towards like European values and becoming part of NATO and the EU. This is like what the country aspired for, together with the majority of the population. However, as it happens very often, is that like the high expectations are followed by disappointment as well. Even though like this corruption was eliminated on the lower level and so on, our expectations of like suddenly becoming rich did not really came true. The country was still struggling more and more. Also, we started struggling with the media freedom, press freedom, and human rights as well. Then we had a war with Russia in 2008. So from this like high optimism and expectations feelings, the country went towards disappointment, frustration, even more poverty, like war. And in 2012, for the first time in the country's history, we changed the government and a new coalition came to rule. And it was also another victory for the country, because it was the no matter whether you supported the new government or not, the fact itself that we changed the government through the elections was very rewarding for the country. We believed that finally we have demonstrated that we are a like young democracy who has managed to change the government through the elections, and we were the first country in our Eastern European region to do that. And as I also mentioned in the introduction, it was an exemplary country for other states. It was the lighthouse of democracy because we have demonstrated so much positive changes in such short time. Then starting from 2012, some strange things started to happen. And when I say strange, I mean some events that can be interpreted in different ways. There have been some concerns that the new government of Georgia was not truly pro-Western, and they had more. They were like more leaning towards Russian influence, even though this has never been announced openly and publicly. After a few years, let's say now, the situation that we have is that most of the politicians that were known for pro-Western values have left the coalition, and now like this new composition, they say that they are loyal towards our pro-Western aspirations. However, some of the activities that they have been carrying out might be interpreted as the opposite of what their announced wishes are. For example, in the beginning of July, on 5th of July, the local activist group have planned the Pride Week, the March of Dignity. And the history of LGBTQ rights in Georgia is also very painful because in 2013, what happened was that the attempt of having the march was attacked severely by some local like church representatives, but not only church, like even like ordinary Georgians, because the acceptance and the openness was not that high. Since then, like 8 years have passed, and the local groups have been trying to have this march like every year, but then like to avoid these clashes, they have been canceling, postponing, doing it in like small protected circles and so on. And this was the first year when there was the feeling that the society is ready to accept this like march without attacks and so on, and that we also the groups were also like hoping that police would be able to protect the freedom of expression of LGBTQ groups. So what was happening on the 5th of July is that while the Pride, Tbilisi Pride was still deciding what to do, like to organize the march or to cancel it, the violent groups attacked the journalists. And up to like 50 journalists were severely beaten. Their property have been destroyed, and the police did not have the order to actually stop this violence. And it was like a horrible event what was happening in Tbilisi on 5th of July. Obviously, Tbilisi Pride decided not to organize the march because like I think like they did not like really expect this kind of like attacks on the journalists and government being not responsive to these events. And after a few days, one of the TV operators who was injured during these events died. So what these events show is that it's like very like wide range of interpretation that we are given. On the one hand, Georgia is openly pro-Western country who wants to become part of the EU in a few years. On the other hand, we as a state fail to protect minorities' rights, to protect freedom of expression, and it somehow also becomes okay and norm to attack media, and this is not only from certain like far-right groups of the country, but also even from the state representatives. By all interpretation of the Georgian law, this is against freedom of expression. But for some reason, this is becoming kind of norm little by little. And many people around me fear that what's happening now might be a way which leads to the situation that we are observing, very, very sad and heartbreaking situation that we are observing in Belarus, where attacks on civil society, NGOs, media is happening every day, every month. Like it has already been like almost a year now, and unfortunately, like this is ongoing, and there has not been any efficient mechanism which could like stop this. So we are having this fear that like, okay, if something similar happens in Georgia, then like what could happen? Like what would be the effective solution? And another like very important vulnerability of Georgian society is its exposure to disinformation, and even the events around the 5th of July, this Pride March, also shows that most of the disinformation narratives that we are being exposed to are very well aligned to the narratives that come from Russian state-owned media. We also, and they have their like satellite organizations or like media organizations who manage to gain followers more and more, and share these anti-vaccination narratives, share the hate speech, anti-LGBTQ narratives, and so on. And I think the vulnerability towards these narratives is increasing more and more in Georgia, and this puts Georgia in a very vulnerable situation.
So, not to say that it is happening already or it will happen in this upcoming election cycle, but I think it's a good thing for us members of civil society to realize as a potential threat. And I think is a good transition into a short discussion about what is happening digitally in Georgia. You've done some work on this topic, and after that, we can talk about some of the recommendations that you put forward as well based on your findings.
I've been wondering like what's happening in that regard in Georgia. I had like my assumptions, but I just like really wanted to like learn more about these situations. And then like I had an opportunity to work on that as my like side project. And what I have found is that Georgia is also like what I didn't mention previously is that like Georgia is a small country. Our population is around 3.5 million, and our like when it comes to digital infrastructure, it is quite, I would say, like well digitalized. Like internet penetration is quite high, mobile internet is quite cheap and affordable, and more and more people, even in rural areas, are joining social media platforms such as Facebook is like the most popular, and it's also like changing very fast. Like 2 years ago, for example, I think we had around 1 million active users, but now I think that much more people have like accounts on Facebook. So when these things were happening in the Cambridge Analytica scandal was out, I remember I was thinking that like something similar would not be possible in Georgia because not those people who vote are on Facebook. Like mostly like Facebook was a place for young people, and young people are the ones who usually do not go to vote. But since then, like in these last 2 3 years, the situation has changed a lot, and almost like majority of people, despite their age, knowledge of foreign language, like rural or urban settlement, they own a mobile phone, they have mobile internet, and they are registered on Facebook. So it has changed a lot, and in that regard, like country has become more accessible digitally to voters. However, we also need to keep in mind that when we say that Georgia is a small country, it also means that it is also affordable for the political parties to reach these people not digitally but offline. And this has been the practice for many years. In the pre-election time, my family gets a door knock at least like 3 4 5 times from by these coordinators, so-called coordinators, who are tasked to like know which family is supporter of which party and so on. And it's kind of like, unless like you restrain yourself from answering those questions, it's kind of open information for them. It's an accessible information, and this has been practiced. However, what I did not know, and then what I found out throughout my study, is that this data does not is not accumulated, to my knowledge, at least like for certain political parties, is not accumulated in a central database, but it's more rather like polling station level. So each polling station, in my understanding, has the coordinator, and they know what kind of results to expect from that particular polling station or district or precinct. But this has it has mostly stayed on a piece of paper. You would see these coordinators in the yard of the polling station. They would have this paper and pen, and would be when they would see that the supporter of their party entered the polling station, they would cross out these names. This has been well documented practice. Many attempts to let this terrible practice go away, but so far not effectively. And very recently, one of the political party, one of the active person who is affiliated with one of the opposition political parties, who used to be in the government previously, said that they have never digitalized these results. All this knowledge have been in the heads of coordinators, knowing that this polling station is ours, that polling station is theirs, this kind of indication. But she also announced that they are changing this practice. They are becoming more digital and more data driven for the upcoming election or the future. So my conclusion is that because of the size of the country, and because the digital infrastructure is not that well developed yet in the country. Yes, we have people on Facebook, but we don't have extra information about these people to actually do this micro-targeting and matching and so on. The political parties still choose to go for the old traditional methods, invest all their resources in that, and try to grab votes through that, rather than try to invest in digital infrastructure and experiment with this new methodologies. The only method that has been observed in Georgian elections, out of the ones that Tactical Tech and their partners have identified, is this robocalling and robo-matching. And even in the case of robocalling and robo-messaging, I have discovered that this is just massively sending out the messages, not being targeted. For example, some people who do not have right to vote in the country, they are foreign citizens, they have been receiving the same messages. Personally, I have also received messages about the majoritarian results, majoritarian elections in the districts that I am not registered in. So this makes me think that we have very well developed SMS marketing services. So what political parties do, they are just like pharmacy or car oil companies. They just go to the SMS marketing company. They say, I'm giving you this much money. Please send this message to this number of people.
You wrote that some of the election monitors reported that there was a blurring of the line between the party and the state, which reduced voters' confidence. And of course, in the perfect world, the ruling party would not be using the resources of the state for its own re-election purposes. But I think this is one of those areas in which the line can be easily blurred in analog ways, but also in digital ways as well, when information and power is more and more centralized. And given the fact that this doesn't seem to be a big problem at the moment in Georgia, to prepare for it, you suggested to watch the use of data by political parties closely, to omit the legislative loopholes, and to raise awareness among these emerging issues among civil society organizations and media representatives. Further, people like you in a place like Georgia, in some ways, maybe have the benefit of time of preparing for a future in which these issues might be more urgent, in which they might be having bigger consequences. How do you think civil society can prepare itself as best as possible for these potential outcomes.
Mhm. So what I have noticed in my research phase is that in many cases, when I in interviews or in personal conversations with the people who work on these issues, because the manipulations are still old-fashioned and traditional, their methods of observation are also focused on that. So in many cases, they have not even considered this. Watchdog organizations have not considered some alternative ways of observing and being prepared for these kind of things. My theory is that if even for the upcoming fall elections, one of the political parties or ruling party or maybe all of them start using these digital methods and they start using personal data for that, it will be already late if the results and the consequences are there. So we need to actually be prepared even now, because we don't know when they will become ready to use these techniques, and we at least need to be aware of that and include that in our observation, pre-election observation checklist, we do Facebook pages or some administrative research and so on. We just need to know that it could be a possibility, to learn from other countries' experiences, because the political parties are also getting the information and inspiration from other countries, and there is no surprise that. So what CSOs and journalists can do, I would say, just have eyes wide open and consider the possibilities of violations in this direction as well. Not only these very old-fashioned ones having coordinators at the polling station and things like that. Something that we have seen over and over and over again for the last 20, 30 years. This is very well-known methods, but we need to also be ready for the new ones. When it comes to loopholes in the legislation, what I mean there is that we do have a personal data protection law, and it protects our personal data. However, how effective this law is the different question. And the biggest problem and challenge in that regard is even our own attitude towards our personal data, because for some reason, and I don't know what this reason could be, we do not perceive our personal data as an asset, and we are not that literate, or we are not that protective of our own data. You would see lots of people sharing lots of personal information on the public setting, on the public setting on Facebook, because for many, as I told you, many people are just now joining the Facebook, right? They might not know the foreign language, they might not be able to read these terms and conditions. No one has taught them that there are different settings, friends only, public, and they become very vulnerable. They might even, I don't know, if someone texts them and asks them to take a photo of your credit card and put it in the messenger, they might even do it. They are very vulnerable because this is very new and they are just now joining the digital space. And even for digitally literate core group of people, let's say my friends, people of my age who have been using Facebook or digital tools for last decades or so, we are not that sensitive towards giving out our own private and personal data, because we grew up in these circumstances. For example, when I was studying in university, the university results, each subject score was publicly published, printed out on a piece of paper with my name, last name, my ID number, and the point of the subject. So we grew up in this environment, and for us, this is not something of a concern. Then another question is the independence of the court, and that's also another big issue. If this violation happens from the ruling party, most likely the court will make decision in their favor, because there are like very, very big questions of the independence of the court, independence from the ruling party's influence. So these are the concerns around this issue.
It's really interesting to hear how many of these issues are so similar to so much of what's happening elsewhere in the world as well. How do you feel the sort of growth of people connecting on Facebook, as you mentioned, in Georgia, is contributing or not contributing to this kind of polarization in the country? Or, perhaps not to get too academic about it, perhaps it's not exactly polarization, but the perception of polarization, at least online. Yeah, is this a worry of yours? Do you feel like it's not an issue yet? How do you see this growth of people in Georgia kind of being online, um, meeting perhaps the dangers of like being politically engaged 24/7?
Firstly, we need to note that political polarization has been an extreme problem for Georgia for many years now, and this is an increasing trend and sentiments in Georgia, and I would definitely attribute some of this like to some degree to more people joining Facebook, and every single of us being like 24/7 engaged in events, and for some reason as well, like every single event is very political, like even this like all the protests, even like some the news about like vaccination, all those things, like every single event that becomes like a big hype on Facebook in discussions has some political connotation. And another problem is that when you have this like pre-election mindset from the government's political parties, like the ruling party and the opposition as well, like their actions are also very often influenced by how I can manipulate the results of the upcoming elections, even if it's like in a few months or a year or whatever, rather than like what is needed for the country's political stability and so on. And this is extremely damaging for the political situation and also for like mental well-being. Very often, like we also like lose the boundaries of where the political discussion ends and start something else. Like we are in this like self-defending and defensive mode all the time, and even like very unpolitical topics as well could increase this tension between groups of people, and this openness and acceptance of different opinion has been decreased a lot, and it's very sad, and I don't know like what could be the solution to that.
Do you think there are lessons for Georgia that can be taken from the revolution of 2003 and approaching the next chapter of challenges, specifically digital challenges, of course, the ones I'm interested in? But I'm curious to hear if there are lessons that you think can be drawn from the history of Georgia and overcoming obstacles in the past for the obstacles that confront the country today or perhaps in the future as well.
That's an interesting. I try not to draw parallel to 2003 revolution, because I really want to like us to go like past the revolutionary road and keep the elections as the source of change in the country. Like lessons learned would be that, and the similarities that I see in the sentiments is that when more and more people start to be openly critical about the status quo, I think this is the indication of the real change. However, I would be more hopeful about the statement if I had not other examples around us where like the same like Belarus, for example, I think it is quite clear that majority is critical against the status quo, but the change is not there. Obviously, like Georgia has different past and Belarus has different past. Like Belarus has had the same dictator for like since the collapse of the Soviet Union. We have seen the changes of the government. However, it's like kind of like scary to see that in the country very close to us in terms of not only geography but also political situation, political past. There is like majority of people willing for the change and the change is not happening. So naturally, like we ask the same question, like if the same happen here, like what guarantee do we have that the different, like we will actually achieve the change? And I do not have answer to that. I would just say that the freedom of expression is very important, and we need to, if there will be additional pressure on freedom of expression, this is something that we need to like fight for, to defend, and I think I also hope that the standard of Georgian people has also been increased, and we will not tolerate or accept some of the things that would be like normal in other cases. I really hope for that, but I don't know like what will be the reality. And what I would wish for is more maturity, especially digital maturity, and more like critical thinking, like not believing everything you see in online field, and actually like resistance towards disinformation is also like a good foundation for like this digital maturity. I don't know if this term exists or I just invented it, but I actually like it very much because this is exactly what I think we miss, not only in this like newcomers to Facebook, like old generation people, but even like people of my age, being like less emotional and more rational, even like in what you express in your opinions, like is this like helping the situation or increasing the polarization even more, like asking these kind of questions ourselves, like engaging in some like first discussions. Like sometimes these discussions are actually helping the situation and is very important for democratic processes, but sometimes it's fueling even more like tensions and disparities. So like more and more people being conscious about making these choices should be something that we should be looking for in the upcoming, especially the upcoming few months, because I think we will have very very hard pre-election time period now, and I'm sure that there will be some methods which are not morally and ethically acceptable methods that will be displayed, and we need to be like ready for that and morally up to the challenge.
Absolutely. And Nino, so the elections are planned for October, you mentioned. When do you expect the campaigning to really pick up?
Officially, I don't know when it is planned, but unofficially, I think the campaign has never been off since the previous elections. I think it's been ongoing. Even like all this, like boycotting and the negotiations and those like all these actions were like fueled by the prism of upcoming elections or the potential new elections, repeated elections that were requested after the previous one. So I think Georgia has not been out from the pre-election campaign so far.
If you enjoyed today's interview and you want to find out more about the influence industry, data-driven political campaigns, and anything else about Tactical Tech's work, check out influenceindustry.org.